Number 3. Sophie Sir Key. In one of our earliest videos, 4 Unsolved Door Murders, we discussed the murder of 20-year-old Sophie Sir Key. Sophie Sir Key grew up in the small village of Pickett's Point, Alaska. In the fall of 1991, she started attending the University of Alaska Fairbanks on a full scholarship. She wanted to be a marine biologist, but after her first year, she decided to take a year off and she moved back home to Pickett's Point. She needed to work and save money to get some orthodontic work done. On Saturday, April 24th, 1993, Sir Key flew to Fairbanks because she had an orthodontist appointment on Monday morning. She was supposed to fly back home after her appointment. While she was in Fairbanks, she stayed with her friend, Shirley Wasuli, in one of the university's dormitories, Bartlett Hall. On the Saturday that she arrived, Sir Key ran some errands around Fairbanks and hung out with some friends. On Sunday night, Sir Key went out with 3 friends to see a movie. During the evening, one of the friends took this photo of Sir Key. Sir Key's friends dropped her off at Bartlett Hall at around midnight. Sergei Wasuli and Wasuli's boyfriend ordered a pizza. They ate the pizza in Wasuli's dorm room, which was on the 2nd floor. After they ate, Sergei said she was going outside for a cigarette. Wasuli suggested smoking near the vents in the women's washroom because it was cold outside. Then Sergei walked out of the dorm room. By 1:30 a.m., Sergei had not returned. Wasuli and her boyfriend decided to go sleep in his dormitory. Wasuli wrote a note for Sergei and stuck it to her dorm room door. The next morning, which was Monday morning, Wasuli returned to her dorm room at about 8:50. She found the note she had written on the door unlocked, and her bed was made. Wasuli was annoyed that Sir Key didn't lock her door. Later that day, Wasuli started to think that maybe Sir Key didn't sleep in her dorm room. Wasuli called Sir Key's orthodontist and found out that she had not shown up for her appointment. So Wasuli reported Sir Key missing that Monday afternoon. That same afternoon, at 2:40, a custodian was cleaning the women's washroom on the 2nd floor of Bartlett Hall. In the washroom next to the shower stalls was a small room that contained a bathtub. In the bathtub, he found the dead body of 20-year-old Sophie Sir Key. The medical examiner determined that Sir Key had been sexually assaulted, stabbed 3 times in the face, and shot once in the back of the head. 2 of the stab wounds were in the corner of her right eye, and they were probably inflicted when she was alive. The other stab wound was on her right cheek, and it may have been inflicted after she was dead. The cause of death was the gunshot to the back of the head. The gun was a .22 caliber handgun. At first, the police thought that Sir Key was killed in the bathtub, but they later thought it was possible that she was killed elsewhere and dumped in the tub. A woman had been in the shower stall that shared a wall with the room that contained the bathtub at about 1:30 a.m. on Monday morning. She heard muffled voices and thumping coming out of the room. What the police found odd was that no one heard a gunshot, despite the fact that several students were awake because they were studying for their upcoming final exams. Unfortunately, the police didn't have any concrete leads. They did find the killer's DNA, and they saved it. In the late 1990s, it was tested, but no match was found. In May 2000, the DNA underwent more advanced testing. It was then entered into CODIS, but once again, no match was found. The police collected DNA samples from people they considered suspects, but none of their DNA matched. By 2003, the case was as cold as a winter night in Alaska. In 2009, a cold case investigator with the Alaska State Troopers reopened the case. In 2010, he interviewed a man named Nicholas Dazer. At the time of the murder, Dazer lived on the 3rd floor at Bartlett Hall. He also worked as a campus security guard. On the night of the murder, he was on duty. Dazer was later fired from campus security for carrying a handgun in a dormitory while he was on duty. When the state trooper interviewed Dazer in 2010, he said he had nothing to do with the murder. He said that he didn't own a .22 caliber handgun, but he said his roommate in the dorm, Stephen Downs, did own a .22 caliber handgun, and he kept it in their dorm room. It's not clear if the state trooper talked to Stephen Downs, but he did continue to investigate Sergey's murder. Unfortunately, he retired without solving the case. In 2018, Sophie Sir Key's murder was still unsolved. Then another investigator took over the case, and he got a lab to analyze the killer's DNA to see if they could find any of his relatives in public genealogy databases. In December 2018, the lab got back to the investigator with their findings. They had found the killer's aunt, and she only had one nephew. In 1993, that nephew attended the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and he lived in Bartlett Hall. His name, Stephen Downs. When Sergey was killed, Downs was 18 years old. Downs was born and raised in Maine, and he started at the University of Alaska Fairbanks in the fall of 1992, and he graduated in 1996. After he graduated, he lived in Arizona for a while, and then he moved to Auburn, Maine, where he worked as a nurse. He had recently been fired because of a totality of substandard performance. Downs did not have a criminal record, and he had never been arrested, so his DNA was never inputted into CODIS. In February 2019, the Maine State Police went to Downs' home and asked him about Sergey's murder. He said that he remembered a young woman was murdered in the dormitory while he was living there, but he didn't know anything about the murderer. The police showed Downs a photograph of Sergey, and he said he only recognized her from the posters that had been put up around the dormitory asking for information about her murderer. Downs said he lived on the 3rd floor of Bartlett Hall, and he spent a lot of time with his girlfriend, who lived on the 4th floor. He said that on the night of the murder, he was probably in his girlfriend's dorm room. He said that he didn't think that he had ever been on the 2nd floor of the dormitory. As the police were wrapping up their interview, they showed Downs Sergey's photo again. Once again, Downs said he only recognized her from the posters. He said, "I remember the pictures. It's terrible. Poor girl." The next day, the police got a warrant to search Downs' house and to get a sample of his DNA. His DNA was then compared to the killer's DNA, and it was a match. Over 25 years after Sophie Sir Key was killed, 44-year-old Stephen Downs was charged with her murder. At the time of this video, Downs is awaiting extradition to Alaska. Number 2. Gregory and Zachary Whitman. In our November 2017 video, 3 controversial cases of kids killing their siblings, we cover the story of brothers Gregory and Zachary Whitman. In October 1998, Gregory was 13 years old and Zachary was 15. They lived with their parents, Sue and Ronald, in New Freedom, Pennsylvania. On October 2nd, Zachary was sick and he stayed home from school. At 3:06 that afternoon, Gregory got off the school bus and he walked home. The following call came into 911.
Hey, what's your name?
I'm Zach.
Your name is Zach? Your
Yeah.
last name?
Whitman.
Whitman.
Yeah. I gotta call my mom. She's
Okay,
at work.
what's your phone number there, Zach?
792923579. I hear them.
Okay, they're on their way. I'm going to go ahead and hang up with you.
Okay.
You're sure there's nobody else around?
I don't see anyone. I don't see anyone. I didn't look. I don't want to look. I don't want to look.
Listen to me a minute. Okay, you say you were upstairs and you heard a bang and that's it.
Not a bang. It's
Not
like,
a bang, you heard a loud noise.
Just like suffering almost, like knuckling around. Yeah, and then I come downstairs and the door's cracked. He's just lying there. Just lying there.
7 minutes after Zachary called 911, paramedics and the police arrived at his family's home and they found a gruesome crime scene. In the laundry room at the rear of the house, Gregory was lying in a pool of his own blood. He had been stabbed, cut, and slashed over 100 times. About 65 of his wounds were in his neck area. Those stabs, cuts, and slashes had nearly decapitated Gregory. During the first few minutes after the police and the paramedics arrived at the home, Zachary was in the front yard, screaming that he had to call his mother. Then a paramedic came out to the front yard to check on Zachary. The paramedic noted that Zachary had blood on his hands, on his shirt, and on the bottom of his socks. Blood was also found on the cordless phone that Zachary used to call 911. Then a police officer came outside and talked to Zachary. Zachary said he was in his parents' bedroom when his brother came home. He said that the phone rang and he answered the phone that was on the second floor. The caller was Gregory's girlfriend and she asked if Gregory was home. Zachary told her that he didn't think that Gregory was home yet and he hung up the phone. Then he heard what he thought was wrestling downstairs. He had just assumed that Gregory was horsing around with one of his friends. Zachary said he walked to the stairs, and from the top of the stairs, he saw blood and a broken table in the front foyer. Zachary said he went downstairs and followed the blood to the laundry room, where he found Gregory lying in a pool of blood. He then called 911. The police looked for blood by spraying lumino around the inside and the outside of the Whitman's house. A mound of dirt in the backyard beside the family's hot tub lit up when it was sprayed. The police dug in that area and they found a pair of bloody soccer goalie gloves and a penknife that had a blade that was 1 3/4 inches long. The goalie gloves belonged to Zachary. The medical examiner said that Gregory's wounds could have been made by the penknife. The police didn't find any evidence that anyone other than Zachary and Gregory were in the house at the time of the murder. So 8 days after the murder, Zachary was arrested for killing his brother. Gregory and Zachary's parents, Ronald and Sue, hired a defense lawyer for Zachary named Christina Gutierrez. Gutierrez later became infamous because she was the lawyer of Anon Syed, the subject of the first season of the Serial podcast. In 2000, before Zachary went to trial, Sue and Ronald filed a complaint against Gutierrez. They gave her over $45,000 to pay for experts and to keep in escrow. but Gutierrez failed to pay the experts, and she didn't keep the money in escrow. By May 2001, 19 other people had also lodged complaints against Gutierrez, saying they had paid her money for work she never completed. Part of the problem was that, about 6 months earlier, in December 2000, Gutierrez had been hospitalized. She stayed in the hospital for the next 3 months. She had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and she had gone blind in one eye. In May 2001, Gutierrez agreed to be disbarred instead of fighting the charges. After Gutierrez was disbarred, Sue and Ronald hired a different defense lawyer for Zachary. Zachary didn't end up going to trial until May 2003, about 4.5 years after the murder. Even though he was 15 at the time of the murder, he was charged as an adult. The prosecution contended that Zachary attacked his brother as soon as he walked in the front door. They alleged that Zachary walked up behind his brother, and using the penknife, he slit his throat. He either picked up or dragged Gregory into the laundry room, where he continued to slash, cut, and stab him. Zachary's defense was that the physical evidence didn't support the prosecution's theory about what happened that afternoon. Experts said that the penknife was too flimsy to cause all the wounds, and it probably would have been bent or broken had it been used in the killing. They also said that the killer would have probably had cuts on his or her hands, because the knife probably would have slipped a few times during the frenzied attack. If the killer had been wearing the soccer goalie gloves, there would have been cuts on the gloves. But there were no cuts on the gloves. Zachary only had one small cut on his left ring finger. Also, during the attack, blood was splattered all over the killer's body. But Zachary didn't have any blood on his face or in his hair. However, he did have blood on his shirt and his hands. Zachary's lawyer said that the blood got on his hands and his shirt because he moved Gregory's body after the 911 dispatcher had directed him to move Gregory's body. Zachary's lawyer also argued that the timeline didn't support the theory that Zachary killed his brother. Gregory's girlfriend called the Whitmans home at 3:15. The Whitmans had 2 phones in their home. Both phones made distinctive noises when they were answered. Gregory's girlfriend was sure that when Zachary answered the phone at 3:15, he answered the phone on the 2nd floor. She said that Zachary sounded normal and he wasn't out of breath. Also, no blood was found on the 2nd floor of the house. Then, 2 minutes after Gregory's girlfriend called, Zachary called 911. Zachary's lawyer argued that 2 minutes was not enough time for Zachary to stab Gregory 100 times and bury the gloves and the knife. Also, there was no evidence that Zachary buried the gloves and the knife. No trace of dirt or soil were found on him. Finally, Sue and Ronald testified that Zachary had no reason to kill his brother. They said that they got along and they loved each other. They were also protective of each other. The prosecution couldn't even come up with a plausible motive for why Zachary would want to kill his younger brother. Zachary was ultimately found guilty of first-degree murder. Since he was charged as an adult, he was sentenced to a mandatory life sentence without a chance of parole. After Zachary was convicted, his parents continued to support him, and they hired lawyers to file appeals on his behalf. The stress of the entire situation took a devastating toll on Sue and Ronald's marriage. In a 15-minute online documentary, They said that they were still together, but they were more like roommates than husband and wife. They said that they lost a lot of friends who couldn't understand how they could support Zachary. Ronald and Sue never moved out of the house where Gregory was killed. While Zachary was in prison, he maintained his innocence. In 2012, the United States Supreme Court ruled that giving life sentences without the chance of parole to people who were under the age of 18 when they committed their crime was cruel and unusual punishment, thus making it unconstitutional. So going forward, no one who committed a crime under the age of 18 would be sentenced to life without parole. Then in 2016, the Supreme Court made the ruling retroactive. That meant that anyone who had previously been sentenced to life without parole for a crime they committed under the age of 18 would be given a new sentence. In late 2017, discussions began on what Zachary Whitman's new sentence would be. During one of these discussions, Zachary's lawyer learned that before Zachary went to trial in 2003, the prosecution had offered him a plea deal. But Zachary's lawyer never informed him of the offer. This was evidence of ineffectual counsel. In February 2018, a judge vacated both Zachary's conviction and his sentence, and he was given a new trial. Not long after his conviction and sentence were vacated, Zachary was offered a plea deal. He could plead guilty to third-degree murder. Only 3 states have third-degree murder: Florida, Minnesota, and Pennsylvania. According to the website U.S. Legal, third-degree murder can be defined as homicide committed with the intention of causing bodily harm, but not necessarily death. In Pennsylvania, the maximum sentence for third-degree murder is 40 years. Zachary was offered a sentence of 15 years and 230 days to 40 years. This included time served. The new sentence will allow him to apply for parole in less than a year. When signing the plea deal, the prosecutor considered Zachary's good behavior in prison and the fact that Zachary was assessed as a minimal risk to the public. Zachary agreed to take the plea deal. The plea deal that his lawyer did not tell him about before he went to trial in 2003 had a shorter sentence than the plea deal he accepted. In February 2018, Zachary admitted in court that he stabbed his brother to death. Zachary testified that at 3:15 p.m. on the day of the murder, Gregory's girlfriend called and he answered the upstairs phone. Even though he knew Gregory was home, he told Gregory's girlfriend that he wasn't there and he hung up the phone. He said that Gregory got mad at him for hanging up the phone. Zachary said he became angry with Gregory because Gregory was mad at him. Zachary said he went into his bedroom and grabbed the soccer goalie gloves and the penknife. He then went downstairs and Gregory followed him. Gregory kept hassling him about hanging up the phone and he would not let it go. So in the front foyer, Zachary stabbed his brother. Gregory then ran to the laundry room and Zachary chased him. Zachary caught up with Gregory in the laundry room and he continued his attack. He then buried the gloves and the knife and then called 911. Zachary said he did not want to kill his brother, he just wanted to scare him. He said that things just got out of hand. 11 months after pleading guilty to third-degree murder in January 2019, Gregory Whitman was released on parole. He was 35 years old and he had served about 15 years in prison. Number 1. The Norcal Rapist. In our video, 3 Unsolved Mysteries with Video Clues Part 2, which was released in August 2017, we examined the case of the Norcal Rapist. It's believed that the Norcal Rapist first struck on June 23, 1991. His victim was a woman who lived by herself in a townhouse in Rohnert Park, California. When he broke into her home, he was wearing a mask and he was armed with a gun. He took her to her bedroom where he tied her up and blindfolded her. He left her on her bed while he snooped around her home. He then came back to her room, untied her, and sexually assaulted her. Afterward, he held and cuddled her. The woman said that her attacker was apologetic and soft-spoken. He told her that he had been stalking her. He then said he was going to leave her alive, but he threatened to come back and hurt her if she went to the police. Just before he left her bedroom, he told her to start locking her doors because someone might walk in and try to hurt her. The woman reported the attack, but the police didn't make an arrest. He struck again 6 months later in December 1991. This time, he broke into the home of a 42-year-old woman living in Sonoma, California. After he sexually assaulted her, he forced her to drive to an ATM and then made her withdraw money to give to him. Then they drove back to her home where he sexually assaulted her again. He left her alive but threatened to kill her if she went to the police. In February 1992, the same man broke into the home of a 30-year-old woman in Vallejo, California. This time, he was armed with a knife. After he got into the woman's home, he came up behind her and held a knife to her throat. The woman managed to wrestle the knife away from her attacker, and she stabbed him above his left eye. Although he was injured, he managed to tackle the woman, and he dragged her into her bedroom, where he sexually assaulted her. The next recorded attack happened nearly 4.5 years later, on Halloween night 1996. A 39-year-old woman was handing out candy at her home in Martinez, California. A man wearing a skeleton mask knocked on her door. When she opened the door, the man forced his way in. After he sexually assaulted the woman, he stole her credit card. 3 weeks after the assault, the man called his victim at work and he apologized to her. Around the same time that he called and apologized to his last victim, he broke into the home of a woman in Woodland, California. He tied her to her bed and then started snooping around her home. While he was searching her home, the woman was able to free her arms. Before she could free her legs, the man came back into the bedroom. She grabbed a pair of scissors which were on her nightstand, and she stabbed the man in his left forearm. This angered the man, and the woman became terrified that he might do something like mutilate her. So she yelled out that she was pregnant. She wasn't actually pregnant, but she had previously learned to say that as a way to dissuade a man from sexually assaulting her. It apparently worked because he left without harming her any further. A couple months later, in January 1997, he sexually assaulted 2 women in their home in Davis, California. He stole one of their bank cards and he used it at an ATM in Woodland, California. He was caught on the ATM's camera withdrawing money. Unfortunately, the camera didn't capture a clear shot of his face because he was wearing a form-fitting clear mask. In July 1997, he struck again, this time in Chico, California. Then after that assault, the attacker went quiet, where he may have been committing assaults that weren't reported to the police. Then in July 2000, about 3 years after his last attack, he attacked a 29-year-old woman in her home in Davis, California. After that, it appears he took another hiatus. The break lasted for 6 years, and during that time, the women of Northern California were hoping that he would remain dormant. Some people speculated that he had been arrested and jailed for another crime. But then, on October 13, 2006, a 24-year-old woman living in Sacramento came home to find an SUV she didn't recognize parked in her garage. She had a roommate, and the woman thought that the SUV may have belonged to a guest of her roommate. She walked into her home, and a masked man grabbed her from behind. He took her upstairs to a bedroom where her 28-year-old roommate was bound and blindfolded on the bed. He sexually assaulted both of them. Then he made them shower with him. After they showered, he said he would kill them if they went to the police. He told them that he knew where they worked. He also took lurid photos of them. He said he would show the photos to their friends and family if they went to the police. After spending about 5 hours in the home, he drove off in his SUV. The women decided to call the police as soon as he left. The police searched their neighborhood, but they couldn't find their attacker. But they did find surveillance video that captured his SUV. It was either a white or silver SUV, and it was a few years old. After he attacked the two roommates, his 15-year crime spree apparently came to an end. During that time, he broke into at least 8 homes, sexually assaulted 10 women, and attempted to sexually assault another woman. Since he had taken breaks before, people were worried that he would start up again at any time. So the police put a lot of effort into unmasking him. A few months after the last attack, the police announced that they had connected 10 of the cases through DNA. The DNA was entered into CODIS, and unfortunately, no match was found. What the police knew about the Norcal Rapist was that he stalked most, if not all, of his victims. He knew that none of his victims lived with men, and he appeared to know where they all worked. The police were also pretty confident that he owned a white or silver SUV because it was captured on his victim's neighbor's surveillance camera. The police thought that the SUV was his own vehicle for 2 reasons. The first is that they knew that the SUV was a few years old at the time of the assault because of the model of the SUV. That meant it wasn't from a rental company. Also, no white or silver SUVs were reported stolen in Northern California around the time of the home invasion. Several victims saw his face, and they described him as a pale white man with brown hair. He was about 5'8" to 5'10". In the 15 years since he started his crime spree, he had gotten chubbier and he had grown a pot belly. He had also started spiking up his hair. The police also thought that he may have a scar above his left eye from being stabbed with his own knife, and a scar on his left arm from when he was stabbed with the scissors. Despite having several descriptions of the attacker and a video recording of his vehicle, no viable leads were developed over the next decade. Then in September 2018, the police had lab used the rapist's DNA in a reverse genealogy search in the GEDmatch database. This is the same database that led to the arrest of Joseph James DeAngelo, aka the Golden State Killer. After 10 days of research, the the lab had a match. On September 20th, the police were notified that the DNA belonged to a 58-year-old man named Roy Waller. Waller was arrested the next day when he arrived at work. Waller lived with his wife in a modest house with a white picket fence in Benicia, California. His neighbors said that he was pleasant, but he wasn't very outgoing. Waller worked at the University of Berkeley as a safety specialist. According to the university, he managed programs to help ensure safety and training regarding the use of equipment and machinery that include forklifts, aerial lifts, and respirators. He started working at the university in 1992, about a year after the attacks began. Before the police got the DNA results back, Waller had not been on their radar because they had no reason to suspect him. He had never been arrested, and he didn't have a criminal record. When Waller was arrested in September 2018, 12 charges were filed against him. In January 2018, 28 more charges were added, and 2 months later, 4 more charges were filed. Waller is currently being held in the Sacramento County Jail. In 2019, he had to be transferred to another part of the jail for his own safety. Waller's lawyer says that Waller plans on pleading not guilty to all 44 charges. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Hopefully you found it interesting. If you did, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos just like it. Also, please go to criminallylisted.com where you can suggest cases, buy merch, and find out about an exclusive podcast. But that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.